Chapter 1. The Encounter. Captain Aiden Shaw had always expected his first taste of combat in space to be amidst the flashing lights of battle, the sound of laser fire tearing through hulls, the smell of burning metal and ozone. Instead, it came in the form of a solitary confrontation on a barren planet at the edge of the galaxy, far from the hustle of the Federation's wars and the politics of the core worlds. Aiden's ship, the Exodus, had been sent on a routine reconnaissance mission, nothing more than a few scans of the planet's atmosphere. A simple check to ensure that no hostile forces were lurking in the far reaches of space. But when the sensors picked up a distress signal, a faint, encrypted transmission from the planet's surface, he couldn't ignore it. The signal was odd, almost ancient in its construction, the kind of transmission designed to be understood by only a select few, and it carried a tone that stirred something deep in Aiden's gut. It wasn't just a call for help. It was a plea, a cry that seemed to echo across the void, pulling him towards it like a moth to a flame. Ignoring his orders for caution, Aiden rerouted the Exodus, making a direct descent into the planet's atmosphere. What awaited him was far beyond what any of them could have prepared for. As the ship's engines hummed softly, cutting through the dense clouds of orange and purple mist, Aiden couldn't shake the sense of unease that gripped him. His crew, normally filled with banter and eager to explore new worlds, had grown silent as the ship descended into the eerie atmosphere. The planet was as lifeless as it appeared from orbit, nothing but rocky terrain, jagged mountains, and the faint outlines of ruins buried in the ever-shifting dust. Yet something felt wrong. As the Exodus touched down in a clearing, the door to the cargo hold hissed open, and the crew stepped out, their boots crunching on the dry earth beneath them. The air was thick, heavy with the scent of decay, and Aiden couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't alone. His hand instinctively hovered over the hilt of his sidearm as he scanned the area. The ruins in the distance seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy, almost as though the ancient stones were alive, breathing, waiting for something. The crew's equipment whirred to life as they began their scans, but Aiden couldn't focus on the readings. His eyes kept returning to a single point in the distance, where the ruins seemed to shift and move. He narrowed his gaze, trying to make sense of the shapes, but his breath caught in his throat when he saw her. She was standing at the edge of the ruins, her figure towering against the backdrop of ancient stone, her armor gleaming in the dim light, every inch of her posture radiating menace and power. She was tall, easily 7 feet tall, her skin a deep, almost metallic shade of purple, her features sharp and alien in a way that made Aiden's heart skip a beat. She wore armor that looked like it had been forged in the heart of a dying star, dark, jagged, and covered in strange markings that seemed to pulse with life. Her eyes, glowing with an unnatural intensity, locked onto Aiden's, and for a moment, everything else faded into the background. The air between them seemed to hum with an energy that Aiden couldn't comprehend. Without a word, the alien woman dropped to her knees, her face expressionless but her body trembling, as if caught between pride and desperation. "Don't kill me, human," she said, her voice deep and commanding, yet laced with a hint of vulnerability that Aiden couldn't quite place. "I'll be your wife." The words echoed through the stillness of the planet, leaving Aiden frozen in place, unable to process the absurdity of the statement. His hand faltered on his sidearm, the tension in the air thickening as the alien woman's gaze never wavered. What are you saying?" Aiden asked, his voice hoarse as he struggled to find his bearings. The woman's eyes flashed with something between fear and defiance, and she spoke again, her words slow and deliberate, as though she had rehearsed them 1,000 times. "You are the one. You are the one chosen by the ancient laws of this world. My people, we have a tradition, a bond between warrior and the one who can save us." Aiden's mind reeled. He had encountered strange customs, odd rituals, and ancient races before, but this was something entirely new. A warrior pleading for her life and offering herself as a wife in exchange for survival? It didn't make sense, yet somehow, the sincerity in her voice struck him in ways that words alone couldn't convey. The crew behind him shifted uneasily, but Aiden was too stunned to react. "I don't understand," he said, his voice trembling with confusion. "Why me? Why are you offering this?" The alien woman slowly rose to her feet, her gaze never leaving his. She reached up, pulling away the hood of her armor to reveal long, silver hair that shimmered in the fading light, and her skin seemed to glow faintly beneath the surface, marking her as something otherworldly, as if she were a being made of both flesh and stardust. "Because," she said, her voice a whisper that only he could hear, "I am the last of my kind. We, the Valkyrie, are bound by the ancient codes. Our people were once mighty, but we have been decimated by war. Only the strongest can claim the title of Valkyr, and the one who is chosen must be bonded with a warrior. If I die without a mate, our line dies with me. I beg of you, human, do not let me fade into oblivion. Take me, and I will serve you as my people have served those who saved us. I will be your ally, your companion, your wife, if only you promise not to kill me." The words struck him like a punch to the gut. Aiden had faced battles, fought in the most dangerous corners of the galaxy, but he had never encountered a situation like this. He had never seen a warrior one who seemed so capable of destruction and yet so fragile in her plea for survival bow before him, offering herself in the most intimate way possible. He could feel the weight of her offer, the enormity of the decision she had placed in his hands. Aiden had been trained to make split-second decisions, to weigh the lives of others with cold calculation, but this was different. The alien woman, this warrior of the Valkyrie, had given him everything, every last shred of her dignity, her pride, and her people's survival, all in exchange for a promise that he couldn't fathom. She wasn't asking for love or for freedom, she was asking for life. And in that moment, Aiden felt something stir within him, something he hadn't expected, a sense of connection, not just with her, but with the fate of her people. I don't know what to say," Aiden muttered, still unable to wrap his mind around the situation. The woman's eyes softened, and she took a cautious step toward him, her armor clinking with emotion. "You don't have to say anything," she whispered. "You've already chosen." The silence that followed was thick with unspoken promises, and Aiden's mind raced, his thoughts a whirlwind of emotions he couldn't quite control. But in the face of this strange, alien woman, this warrior who had laid everything bare before him, he found that the only thing he could do was step forward, just as she had done, and offer her the only thing he had to give, a chance. He reached out his hand, steadying his breath, his voice low and filled with something he hadn't felt in years. "Then I won't kill you, but I'll need you to explain what comes next." And as he spoke those words, the reality of the strange, unpredictable path they would now walk together began to unfold, a journey that would not only bind them in ways neither could have predicted, but would shape the future of a galaxy that had, until now, been far beyond Aiden's understanding. The air between them hung thick, electric, as Aiden gazed at the alien warrior before him, the gravity of her words settling on his chest like a heavy weight. Her offer was not one of affection, nor of lust, but a desperate plea for survival, a survival that intertwined their fates in ways Aiden could never have imagined. The Valkyrie warrior had knelt before him, not as a supplicant begging for mercy, but as a proud soldier caught in the crossfire of an ancient tradition and a dying race. Her eyes, once fierce and unwavering, now reflected vulnerability, a vulnerability that Aiden, despite himself, could not ignore. The galaxy he had once fought in, with its cold, merciless expanse, suddenly felt smaller, more intimate, as though the weight of countless stars hung on this single, fragile moment. His heart pounded in his chest as he stepped forward, his mind racing. Aiden had known violence, had faced death in its many forms: aliens, machines, entire factions bent on annihilation, but this was different. The galaxy had a way of surprising him, and here, in the depths of this unknown planet, was the most unexpected twist of all: a woman, no, a warrior, who had surrendered herself completely in the face of an unimaginable fate. She was asking for his help, for his promise, and in return, she offered her loyalty, her strength, and her future. The crew of the Exodus stood in the distance, silent observers of the strange scene unfolding before them. They had come to expect the unexpected during their travels, but this, a plea for life from an alien warrior, was far beyond anything they could have anticipated. Aiden felt the weight of their eyes on him, but it wasn't their judgment he cared about now. It was her, this alien woman, who had, in a single desperate act, changed the course of his destiny. Her voice broke through his reverie, the desperation in her tone unmistakable. You don't have to love me, human. You don't even have to trust me. Just take me, and I will serve you, fight beside you, protect you. I will be yours, and you will be mine. And together, we will survive. Aiden's mind reeled, but he understood one thing above all else. She was not a prisoner, nor was she offering herself for power or advantage. She was offering herself in service, a service that was tied to the survival of her people, her race. Aiden had fought wars in the name of survival before, but he had never been presented with such a pure form of devotion. The air between them seemed to crackle with energy, and for a moment, Aiden could hear nothing but his own heartbeat, the distant hum of his ship, and the alien woman's words echoing in his mind. He didn't know what to do. He didn't know how to respond. What could a man like him trained to command, to fight, to survive offer in return for such a desperate plea? He stood there, his mind a whirl of confusion, but also something else, something he hadn't felt in years, a flicker of hope. Maybe it wasn't hope for himself, but hope for her people, for the future of a dying race that had nowhere else to turn. I don't know what to say, Aiden whispered, his voice hoarse. This is beyond anything I've ever been trained for. The alien woman lifted her head, her gaze steady and resolute. Say you will not let me die. Say you will not leave me to vanish, as so many of my people have before me. Say you will stand by me, and I will never leave your side. Her words were like a fire igniting in the depths of Aiden's chest. He didn't have all the answers. He didn't understand her race, her customs, or the ancient law she spoke of, but one thing was clear. Her survival was now in his hands. Whether he wanted it or not, the responsibility had been thrust upon him, and he could feel the weight of it bearing down on him. I won't let you die, Aiden said, his voice steady now, the words coming more naturally than he expected. I'll help you. But this, whatever comes next, we'll figure it out together. The Valkyrie warrior's eyes softened, and for the first time, a flicker of something like relief passed over her face. She rose slowly to her feet, her towering frame dwarfing Aiden, but the energy around her had shifted. Gone was the desperation, replaced with something warmer, more akin to trust. She offered him her hand, and without hesitation, Aiden took it. He wasn't sure what he had just agreed to, but as her hand closed around his, he realized that this moment would change everything for both of them. Chapter 2. The Bond That Binds. The days following Aiden's agreement were filled with a mixture of confusion, quiet contemplation, and an unexpected bond that seemed to form between him and the alien warrior whose name, as he had learned, was Kayla. She was unlike anyone he had ever met. Her culture, her people, and her very being foreign to everything he had known. Yet as the days passed, Aiden found himself growing accustomed to her presence. She was not the monstrous, bloodthirsty alien warrior he had feared. Instead, she was fiercely loyal, calm under pressure, and endlessly determined to fulfill her promise. Despite the overwhelming weight of her people's ancient laws, she was a woman driven by survival, by the need to preserve what little remained of her people, and her devotion to that cause became a quiet force that steadily began to unravel the walls Aiden had carefully built around himself over the years. Kayla, for her part, was just as confused by her feelings. The Valkyrie had long been a proud race of warriors, their culture bound by traditions of honor and battle, and yet here she was, kneeling before a human, offering herself not out of duty or political strategy, but out of an ancient need, a desperate cry for survival. She had expected him to reject her offer, as many had done before, but instead, Aiden had not only accepted her, but had promised to stand by her, to help her find a way to ensure the survival of her people. It was a bond that Kayla had never anticipated, and one that, over the days, began to change her perception of humans, of their potential for compassion and strength. Their conversations were not always easy. Aiden's thoughts often turned to his crew, his mission, and the Federation's policies, all of which had seemed so black and white before meeting Kayla. Now, they blurred, and he found himself torn between duty and the responsibility he had unwittingly inherited. The Exodus was not his ship, and the mission was not his to control, but every time he looked at Kayla, her presence and her plea brought him back to the choices that now seemed so clear. She needed him not just as a commander, but as someone who understood the weight of survival, the cost of sacrifice, and the strength of loyalty. On the third day, Kayla led Aiden through the ruins of her people's ancient city, showing him the remains of her once great civilization. Towering structures of jagged stone, intricate carvings that told the stories of her people's victories and defeats, their rise and fall. The city, now abandoned and forgotten, echoed with the ghosts of the past, and Kayla's voice was heavy as she spoke of her ancestors and the code that had once guided them. She had been trained in the art of war, had fought to protect her people, but now she was the last of her kind, and the weight of that legacy rested squarely on her shoulders. "It wasn't supposed to be like this," Kayla said, her voice soft as she traced a finger along one of the stone pillars. "We were meant to be conquerors, to spread our strength across the stars. But instead, we are dying. And now, all that is left is survival." Aiden listened, his heart heavy with the knowledge that Kayla's pain, her sacrifice, was only just beginning. The alien warrior was no longer a stranger, but a companion, and as they walked through the ruins of her world, Aiden realized that, in some strange way, they were both walking through the ruins of their own lives, one a warrior with nothing left to fight for, and the other a man who had never truly understood what it meant to fight for someone else. As the sun set on the horizon, casting long shadows over the ancient stones, Kayla turned to Aiden, her eyes filled with an unspoken question. The bond between them had shifted, deepened, and with it came an unspoken understanding. Whatever they had been before this moment, they were now bound by something far stronger than either had anticipated. Aiden reached out, gently placing his hand on Kayla's shoulder, his voice low and steady as he spoke the words that had been building in his chest. "We'll figure this out. Together. I won't let your people die, Kayla. I promise you that." Kayla's eyes softened, her features melting into a rare, vulnerable smile. "Then we are already stronger than we were before," she whispered. "And together, we will survive." The following days were a mix of preparation, tension, and quiet companionship. Aiden and Kayla had formed an unexpected bond, and despite their vastly different backgrounds, they began to understand one another in ways that transcended their initial differences. Kayla, once a warrior of unmatched pride, was now learning to trust someone who was as far removed from the strength of her people as possible. And Aiden, though initially burdened by the weight of her plea, had found himself growing more and more attached to her, her strength, and the depth of her sacrifice. He had always believed that humanity's role in the universe was that of a solitary wanderer, wandering among the stars, detached from the affairs of other races. But now, standing beside Kayla amidst the ancient ruins of her people, he was starting to realize that their fates were intertwined in ways that he couldn't ignore. The days in the alien city were filled with quiet reflections and cautious exploration. Kayla had shown Aiden the most sacred places of her people, where the Valkyrie warriors had trained for centuries, their discipline honed to perfection. But now, those training halls stood abandoned, overtaken by the slow creep of time and decay. The Valkyrie had once been a proud and powerful species, their warriors feared across the galaxy. But their glory had dimmed, consumed by the brutal wars that had ravaged their homeworld, and now, only Kayla remained an echo of a once great lineage. As Aiden walked with her through the ruins, he could see the sadness in her eyes, the weight of her ancestors' legacy pressing down on her shoulders. She spoke little, but the silence between them was filled with an understanding that transcended words. She didn't need to explain the destruction of her people. Aiden could see it in every crumbled stone and every cracked pillar. The Valkyrie's wars had been fought not just for conquest, but for survival. And now, survival meant something entirely different for her. In the evenings, as the twin moons rose high above the horizon, Kayla would sit with Aiden by the campfire they had set up near the ruins, her eyes reflecting the flames as she spoke of her past. There was no more fighting, no more enemies to face, but there were memories, sharp as daggers, that haunted her every step. "We were warriors, Aiden," she would say, her voice low and bitter. "And now we are nothing but survivors. I'm the last of my kind, and it's not pride that keeps me alive anymore, it's fear. Fear of fading into nothingness, like so many of my people before me." Aiden's heart ached for her, though he couldn't understand the full weight of her pain. He had known loss in his own way: friends, family, comrades, but to lose an entire race, a culture, a way of life, was a grief that Aiden could scarcely imagine. He didn't have the answers for her, but he was beginning to understand the depth of what she had lost. Despite the weight of their circumstances, their bond began to grow. Each day spent together, whether it was training with weapons, exploring the planet, or simply talking around the fire, brought them closer. Aiden found himself learning the customs of the Valkyrie, how they revered the stars, how they honored their warriors, how they fought not just for survival, but for the honor of their ancestors. And Kayla, though she remained wary of fully trusting him, began to rely on Aiden more and more, her once unshakable pride now tempered by the knowledge that they were, in a sense, in this together. But even as their connection deepened, the reality of their situation began to weigh heavily on them. The warlords who had decimated Kayla's people were not far behind. Her enemies, once distant threats, were now closing in on them, eager to claim the remnants of the Valkyrie as their own. Aiden knew that their time on this planet was running out, and though Kayla had promised to fight beside him, a feeling of dread settled in the pit of his stomach. The choices ahead would not be easy, and the life they had begun to build in the ruins of her people's legacy might soon be shattered by the brutal hand of war. Chapter 3: The Enemy Approaches. Days passed quickly in their secluded refuge, and the planet, once silent and empty, began to pulse with the knowledge that time was running out. The faintest hum in the distance was enough to alert Aiden. He had heard it before, a distinct vibration in the atmosphere that signaled ships descending through the planet's atmosphere. Kayla had taught him to read the signs, to listen for the movements of her enemies, and now he understood the subtle shifts in the wind, the way the sky seemed to hold its breath, as if the planet itself was aware of the approaching storm. Aiden stood at the edge of their camp, staring out into the distance, watching as the first of the enemy ships appeared in the sky, small, sleek, and deadly, descending like vultures toward their prey. He clenched his fists, a sense of unease settling in his bones. He had hoped, foolishly, that they might have time, but there was no denying it now. Their time was up. Kayla stood beside him, her posture rigid, her eyes narrowed as she scanned the horizon. Her once confident demeanor was now replaced with a quiet determination, the same strength that had driven her through the darkest days of her people's history. "They're here," she said, her voice steady despite the tension in the air. "And they won't stop until I'm dead." Aiden turned to face her, his eyes filled with resolve. "Then we fight," he said simply. "We stand together, Kayla. No one's taking you from me." Kayla's lips twitched, a faint smile crossing her face as she looked at him. "You're a fool, human," she said, though there was affection in her tone. "But you're my fool. Let's see if that foolishness is enough to save us." The enemy ships, now in full view, began to descend at an alarming speed. Aiden and Kayla quickly made their way to the ruins of a nearby outpost, where they could set up their defenses. The Exodus remained in orbit, ready to provide air support if needed, but for now, it was up to the two of them to hold the line. As they moved through the ancient ruins, Kayla gathered her weapons blades forged from the bones of her ancestors, powerful enough to cut through the toughest armor. Aiden, armed with a standard-issue rifle, stood beside her, ready to face whatever came. "We're not alone," Kayla said suddenly, her eyes flashing. "There are others like me, survivors from my people, those who fought with honor, who still believe in the old codes. They'll come. They always come when I call." Aiden nodded, though he wasn't entirely sure how much help the few remaining warriors of the Valkyrie would be against the onslaught that was approaching. But one thing was clear: they would fight, and they would fight together. This was no longer just about survival, it was about honor, about protecting the last of the Valkyrie and the promise they had made to each other. The first enemy soldiers arrived in a wave of dust and noise, their armored vehicles rolling over the ancient ground with terrifying ease. The air was filled with the sound of gunfire as Aiden and Kayla opened fire, each shot striking true. Kayla moved with the grace of a seasoned warrior, her blades cutting through the air, felling her enemies with swift precision. Aiden, though not as fast, held his ground, firing with deadly accuracy, every shot a testament to the lessons he had learned from Kayla. As the battle raged on, Kayla's warriors arrived, emerging from the shadows of the ruins like phantoms, their weapons gleaming in the dim light. With their help, the tide of battle slowly began to turn. The enemy, though powerful, was not prepared for the ferocity of the Valkyrie, and they began to retreat, their morale faltering as Kayla's warriors cut them down one by one. But even as victory seemed within their grasp, Aiden knew that this was just the beginning. The enemy would not stop, not now, not ever. They would return, stronger, more determined, and Aiden and Kayla would have to face them again. Together, the bond between them had grown stronger in the heat of battle, and though they were both exhausted, both battered and bruised, they knew that the fight for survival was far from over. As the last of the enemy forces retreated into the horizon, Kayla turned to Aiden, her eyes filled with something deeper than gratitude. "We did it," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Aiden nodded, though he knew the real battle was still to come. "Together," he said softly, his gaze meeting hers. "We fight together." And with that, they turned back toward the ruins, ready for whatever came next, knowing that, whatever the future held, they would face it side by side. As the distant rumble of the retreating enemy faded into the vast emptiness of the planet's desert landscape, Aiden and Kayla stood amidst the ruins, their bodies bruised, covered in the marks of battle, but their spirits, for the moment, unbroken. The echoes of war still lingered in the air, a bitter reminder that peace, for now, was only temporary. Their victory was hard-earned, but as Aiden looked over at Kayla, watching her breathe deeply, her expression a mixture of triumph and sorrow, he realized that it wasn't just the battle that had brought them closer, it was the uncertainty of what would come next, and the fact that they had survived it together. Kayla, though strong and stoic, was not invincible. She had already lost so much: her people, her pride, and now she had risked everything once again to defend what was left of her lineage. The warlords of the Crimson Star Alliance might have been driven back for now, but they would return. They always did. And when they came, Kayla would stand, as she always had, not just for herself, but for her people and the honor of those who had fought beside her. And Aiden? Aiden wasn't just a soldier. He wasn't just her protector. Somewhere in the chaos of the battle, they had become more, their bond forged not by duty, but by choice, a choice neither could ignore. As the last of the Valkyrie warriors who had answered Kayla's call tended to the wounded, Aiden and Kayla walked through the debris, hand in hand, silent, yet understanding the weight of their unspoken thoughts. The once thriving city had been reduced to rubble, but in the midst of it all, the air felt cleaner, purer, like they had broken free from something dark and suffocating. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the ancient stone, and for a fleeting moment, it felt as if the world was at peace again. "We've done it," Aiden said quietly, turning to Kayla. "But I know this isn't over." "Not really. They'll come again." Kayla nodded, her gaze unwavering, filled with the same intensity Aiden had seen when they had first met. "They'll come, but we'll be ready." The truth of her words settled between them, like a cold wind in the stillness of the night. The enemy would return, but so too would their strength, their resolve. Together, they had survived, and now they had something far more important than mere survival. They had a chance to rebuild, to restore what had been lost, to create something new from the ashes of the old world. The ruins around them were no longer a symbol of defeat, but a foundation for the future. And yet, even as they spoke of plans to rebuild, a new threat was already making its way toward them, hidden in the shadows, waiting for its moment. Aiden had felt it before, a slight shift in the atmosphere, a barely perceptible disturbance in the air. He tensed, his instincts honed over years of combat telling him something was coming, something he hadn't anticipated. Without a word, he turned to Kayla, his hand on the hilt of his sidearm, his senses alert. Kayla's eyes widened as she too sensed the change. "They're here. The real fight is about to begin." Chapter 4. The Final Stand. The battlefield had shifted again. What had once been a hard-won victory had turned into a final, desperate struggle for survival. The enemy, relentless in their pursuit, had come with reinforcements, more ships, more soldiers, and the deadly weaponry of an empire unwilling to let the last of the Valkyrie stand free. They came in the dead of night, their ships dropping from the sky like meteors, their engines roaring with fury. This was not a small skirmish anymore. This was the endgame, the final stand. Aiden and Kayla stood together at the front lines, side by side with the last of Kayla's warriors, who had now become more than her soldiers. They were her family, her tribe. There was no room for doubt anymore, no room for hesitation. This would be the moment that defined their future, one way or another. The enemy dropped into the ruins like a storm of chaos, laser fire illuminating the darkness, cutting through the smoke and dust that rose from the shattered remains of the city. Aiden's rifle was steady in his hands as he fired, his shots hitting with precision, each one dropping an enemy before they could get close. Beside him, Kayla fought with unmatched ferocity, her blade cutting through the air like a lightning strike, every movement a deadly dance. The warriors of her people followed her lead, taking the fight to the enemy with everything they had left. The battle raged on, hours stretching into an eternity of gunfire, explosions, and the clash of steel. Aiden moved with calculated purpose, his every step driven by the need to protect Kayla, to protect the promise they had made to one another. She fought beside him, her presence as unyielding as the mountains that towered over them, and together, they carved a path through the enemy forces. But the tide of battle was not so easily swayed. The enemy had more soldiers, more technology, and as the hours passed, their advantage became clearer. The walls of the ruins began to close in on them, the warriors of the Valkyrie growing fewer, their strength waning. Kayla, bleeding from a wound across her side, never faltered. "We'll hold them off," she said, her voice strained, but her resolve unshaken. "We fight until the end." Aiden nodded, his heart heavy with the weight of their situation. He had always known that war, even when won, always demanded a cost. He had never imagined, though, that the cost would come in such an intimate, brutal form. He could feel her life force draining as she fought, each blow she struck weakening her. And it was then that Aiden realized the truth. This fight was not just about survival. It was about love, about the bond they had forged between them, and the price they would pay for that love. As the enemy advanced, a familiar figure emerged from the chaos, a warlord, towering and brutal, leading a group of elite soldiers toward them. His face was covered by a mask, but his eyes burned with the fury of a man who had been humiliated and now sought to reclaim his honor. Aiden's pulse quickened as he recognized the warlord's insignia. This was the leader of the Crimson Star Alliance, the very force that had destroyed Kayla's people. The moment had come. With a roar of defiance, Kayla charged, her blade raised high. Aiden followed her, but just as they reached the warlord, a sharp pain sliced through his side. He gasped, stumbling, and for a moment, everything went dark. His vision blurred as he felt his strength fading. But through the haze, he saw Kayla still fighting, still standing, her blade meeting the warlords with a force that shook the earth beneath them. "No!" Aiden shouted, his voice hoarse, but it was too late. The warlord's blade came down in a deadly arc, and Aiden felt Kayla's presence slip from him, her soul leaving the battlefield, her final breath a whisper that only he could hear. "We fought together." Aiden. The world around him seemed to collapse in on itself as he fell to his knees, the weight of her loss overwhelming him. But even as the last of the enemy forces closed in, Aiden's heart burned with one final, desperate thought. They had fought for something greater than survival. They had fought for love, for a future that would never come. But their bond, forged in the heat of battle, would not be forgotten. As the last of the Valkyrie warriors fell, Aiden stood, his rifle in hand, and in his heart, he felt Kayla with him. Her spirit, her strength, her love. He would carry it with him, always. He had promised her he would fight beside her, and in the end, he had. But the war was over, and now he was left with nothing but the memory of the woman who had changed his life forever.